What's up, 10 Standard? Welcome to This Explainer. Throughout your political science syllabus, we've spent a lot of time talking about the rules of democracy. We've talked about how elections work, how power is shared, the whole shebang. But as we get ready to wrap up our tour of democracy, it's time to ask the million-dollar question. What does democracy actually do? I want you to imagine democracy as a student who has just finished the academic year. Today, we're going to grade that student. We're going to look at the outcomes of democracy by handing out the ultimate report card to see if it actually meets our expectations or if the reality falls just a bit short.
Here is our roadmap for today's audit. We'll be covering assessing outcomes, accountable government, economic realities, social diversity, dignity and freedom, and finally, a quick check your understanding.
All right, let's kick things off with Section 1, Assessing Outcomes, Expectation versus Reality.
When we study democracy, it's really easy to start treating it like a magical fix-all for literally every problem in society. We tend to think, hey, if we just have a democracy, poverty will vanish overnight, everyone will be perfectly happy, and there will be absolutely no conflicts. But is that actually realistic? To truly evaluate democracy, we need to move beyond thinking of it as a magic wand. We need to start looking at what it achieves in real life. So I want to pose a question to you. What outcomes can we reasonably expect of democracy? Is it just a system meant to cope with multiple pressures and accommodate diverse demands? Or is there a fundamental baseline of results that we absolutely must demand from it? Think about it. We shouldn't blame democracy for not solving every single socioeconomic problem, right? Because democracy is just a form of government. It only creates the conditions for achieving something. It's up to the citizens to take advantage of those conditions to actually achieve their goals.
And that brings us to our core definition. When we say outcomes of democracy, we're talking about the actual measurable results produced by a democratic system of government. We're talking about political, economic, and social results. Just like your board exams test you on science, math, and social science, we've got to evaluate democracy's actual performance across different subjects to give it a fair and accurate grade. Moving right along to Section 2, Accountable and Legitimate Government. This subject is all about how governments make decisions and whether they actually answer to the people. Specifically, we're looking at whether democracy produces an accountable, responsive, and legitimate government. Let's talk about the cost of time. Imagine a dictatorship, a completely non-democratic government. They don't have to worry about parliaments, public debates, or what the media thinks. They can make decisions extremely fast. But here's the catch. Because they totally ignore procedures, they often make decisions that people don't accept at all, which leads to massive public backlash. Now consider democracy. Yeah, it's much slower. It takes its sweet time because it follows strict norms and procedures. But here is the absolutely crucial point. Because it takes the time to follow these procedures, its decisions are far more acceptable to the people and much more effective. So the cost of time that democracy pays, it is absolutely worth it. And this brings up another incredibly important political outcome: transparency. Imagine a telescope. If the government is looking through the right end, they can see deeply into the public's life. They know a lot about you. But if the public tries to look back, they might only have a tiny, narrow window to see what the government is doing. In a true democracy, decision-making has to be based on norms and procedures. This means you, as a citizen, have the right and the means to actually examine the process of decision-making. That is transparency. Now, are democracies always perfect at sharing information? No, of course not. But they are undeniably better than non-democratic regimes that operate in total, absolute secrecy.
So how do we grade the political outcome? Look, democracies often fall short on being perfectly responsive, and we all know routine tales of corruption exist. But here is where democracy gets an absolute A+. It produces a legitimate government. It may be slow, it may be a bit less efficient sometimes, but at the end of the day, a democratic government is the people's own government. And because of this, democracy generates overwhelming global support. As your textbook wisely notes, democracy's ability to generate its own support is itself an outcome that simply cannot be ignored.
All right, on to Section 3, Economic Growth and Inequality.
Now, let's tackle the really tough questions. The elephant in the room: money. Does democracy actually make a country wealthy? Does it guarantee that everyone gets a fair share of the pie? Let's audit the economic realities by tracking growth rates from 1950 to 2000. If we compare all regimes, dictatorial regimes actually have a slightly higher rate of economic growth, 4.42 compared to 3.95 for democracies. That might seem a bit worrying at first glance. But wait, look closely at poor countries. When we compare poor countries under dictatorship versus poor countries under democracy, the growth rates are 4.34 and 4.28. The difference is completely negligible.
Economic development depends on population size, global situations, and resources, not just the type of government. So while democracy doesn't guarantee a booming economy all by itself, it certainly doesn't drag it down either.
But hey, economic growth is only half the story. What about economic justice? Think of the world's wealth like a giant pizza. We have a situation where just 2% of the wealthy are feasting on the vast majority of that pizza, while 50% of the poorer population is left scrambling to share one tiny patched-up slice. This tells us a really harsh truth. Just because a country is experiencing economic growth, it does not automatically mean that wealth is being distributed evenly among its people.
Let's back that up with the hard data. The realities of income inequality are pretty stark. Democracies, unfortunately, do not guarantee reduced economic disparities. In democratic countries like South Africa and Brazil, the top 20% of people take away more than 60% of the national income. Meanwhile, the bottom 20% are left with less than 3%. That is a massive, massive gap. Now, countries like Denmark and Hungary perform much better, which proves it is possible to reduce inequality. But overall, reducing poverty remains a huge challenge for democracies globally. Still, considering all the other freedoms democracy offers, this struggle alone isn't a reason to reject the whole system.
Next up, Section 4, accommodating social diversity. So, how do democracies handle countries with multiple competing groups? Different religions, different languages, and cultures? Can we actually produce a harmonious social life? The answer is yes, and there's a step-by-step mechanism of how it works. First, a democracy doesn't pretend differences don't exist. It openly acknowledges diverse ethnic and social groups. Second, it develops constitutional procedures to conduct peaceful competition between them. Third, it successfully negotiates these differences. Remember the example of Belgium from your very first chapter? They amended their constitution specifically to ensure French and Dutch-speaking citizens shared power equally. By doing things like this, democracy achieves its absolute greatest social outcome. It drastically reduces the possibility of tensions becoming explosive or violent. Look, no society can fully resolve all conflicts forever, but democracy gives us the best possible way to negotiate them peacefully.
Which brings us to Section 5, dignity and freedom of citizens. This is the final and arguably most important report card subject, moral outcomes. This is the area where democracy truly shines and stands miles above any other alternative system in the world. We are talking about the dignity and the freedom of the citizens. Think about the concept of moral courage, like the famous example of Rosa Parks refusing to give up her seat on a segregated bus. Historically, so many societies were built on subordination and domination, but the very foundation of democracy is the passion for respect and freedom. When individuals feel they aren't treated with respect, conflicts naturally arise. Democracy, at least in principle, recognizes that every single individual is equal and deserves ultimate dignity. Let's look at how this plays out in securing dignity in our society. Take the dignity of women, for example. Historically, most societies across the globe were strongly male-dominated. Now, while women obviously still face unequal treatment today, democracy provides the recognized principle of equality, and that is a game changer. This gives women the legal and moral ammunition to actually wage struggles against discrimination. The exact same goes for caste inequalities here in India. Democracy has strengthened the claims of disadvantaged and discriminated castes for equal status and equal opportunity. While atrocities unfortunately still occur, they now completely lack any moral or legal foundation. Dictatorships simply do not give citizens this kind of legal backing to fight for their rights.
All right, let's see what you've learned. Section 6, check your understanding.
Okay, my friends, we have audited the political, economic, social, and moral outcomes of democracy. Now it is time to put your conceptual mastery to the test. Let's tackle some textbook exercises together. I guarantee you are completely ready for these. Let's start with an odd one out question. In the context of assessing democracy, which among the following is not an outcome democracies absolutely need to ensure? Is it A, free and fair elections, B, dignity of the individual, C, majority rule, or D, equal treatment before law? Take a second. Which of these is not the ultimate goal?
Did you guess C? If so, you absolutely nailed it. The odd one out is majority rule. Why? Because, as we just learned in the social outcomes section, democracy is not just about the majority bullying the minority. It is about accommodating diverse demands and protecting everyone's rights. Free elections, dignity, and equal treatment, those are the true guaranteed outcomes we are striving for.
Let's try another one. True or false? Based on studies on political and social inequalities, do these inequalities exist in democracies? Recall what we discussed about the economic realities a few minutes ago. Think back to that global pizza concept and the data we looked at from Brazil and South Africa. What do you think? The answer is unequivocally true. Studies show that inequalities absolutely do exist in democracies. As we learned, democracy does not magically eliminate poverty or economic disparity. What it does do, however, is give the poorer majority the voting power and the political voice to actually fight for a better share of the nation's wealth. Expectation versus reality, right?
Let's bring it all together now and issue our final report card for democracy. For political outcomes, it gets a solid A. It might be a bit slow, but it provides transparency, strict procedures, and ultimate legitimacy. For economic outcomes, we have to give it a C+. It doesn't lag far behind dictatorships and growth, but it struggles pretty heavily with income inequality. For social outcomes, an A-. It is hands down the best system we have for negotiating differences and accommodating diversity peacefully. And finally, for moral outcomes, an absolute A+. It is completely unmatched in granting dignity, freedom, and the legal basis to fight against discrimination.
Overall, democracy passes with flying colors, not because it is totally flawless, but because it is ours. I want to leave you with this powerful line straight from your textbook. Democracy generates its own support. It is the recognition that makes ordinary citizens value their democratic rights. The simple fact that you have the dignity to stand up and demand a better system is, without a doubt, the greatest outcome of democracy. So here's my final question for you to chew on. Now that you have this voice, what is the very first thing you are going to use it to demand? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep asking those tough questions, and I'll catch you next time.